All right, welcome everyone to another LinkedIn Live stream, but this time we are not streaming from our intergalactic headquarters in Edinburgh, Scotland. We've got a special on the road edition for you today, and the reason we're on the road is usually that I'm out visiting customers or hanging out with prospects or going to an event or something or learning more about the training industry in general. But not this week, not this weekend. This weekend was a special March Madness edition of travel. My team, North Carolina State, made the Final Four, and we had to go. So it was a great experience. Highly recommend. But that's why we're out here in Phoenix, Arizona, and unfortunately weren't in the championship game last night. But it's been a great experience. So took the opportunity to keep our weekly stream going, and we've got a fun topic to talk about today. One of my favorite stories, how a training team really changed the game for them. And, as always, happy to answer any questions, connect with me on LinkedIn, and we'll have a great kind of consolidated resource of what we're going to talk about today for you to download if you'd like at the end, just to make sure that you can kind of work through and maybe use it to solve some of your own challenges. So let's dive in here. Now, one of the things that was important, one of the things that I wanted to change was you may have seen on the title for this live stream, it was originally how training teams can manage 2x growth without additional budget. But I wanted to change that slightly because really this story is about a training team that drove 2x growth. And it wasn't just 2x growth of their training, it was 2x growth of their entire facility and business. And so really for the agenda today, I want to go through, we have our normal intro, greetings, salutations. In fact, I'm also going to share a good travel tip whenever we do one of these streams from the road. And so we're going to get through that and then talk a little bit about how we think about growth here at Administrate, how our customers think about growth, how they kind of approach it, what are some of the challenges involved when you're growing quickly, and also what is the strategy, how do you execute it, and ultimately what are the outcomes that you should be kind of looking for. So that's kind of what we're going to cover today. Really this story begins with a company called Boston Whaler, and this is one of the boats that they make. They are originally, they're famous for being known as the unsinkable boat manufacturer. I don't think they've ever had a boat sink, and the reason for that is they've got this very innovative hull design. Now, I'm not a mechanical engineer or anything like that, but as I understand it, the actual hull, if you look down at kind of the bottom of that boat, the whole piece is made of a kind of, it's in layman's terms, kind of a styrofoam structure, and that means that the hull itself is buoyant. And they've got a famous picture of the founder of this company driving a boat, or do you drive a boat? You sail a boat, sailing a boat through through a harbor, and the front half of it has been cut off, but it's still floating because the hull itself is very buoyant, which is, I guess, unusual. And Boston Whaler had a problem, and that was they needed to grow. So at this time, this is about 6 or 7 years ago, the economy was doing really well, and their boat line was doing very well. I think they had acquired the Mercury brand of engines, and so there's a lot of things that were going well, and they wanted to start building bigger boats. They've kind of been specializing in the 35-foot category, and they wanted to build bigger and bigger boats. And so what they did is they said, we have got to double the size of our factory, not only in just headcount terms, but also in terms of actual physical plant size needed. So they had to buy land. They're kind of on this inlet in North Florida. They had to buy more land, and they had to 2x their headcount. They had to 2x their product line because they're going to bring out these new models of boats. And the physical space, of course, needed to accommodate all these extra people and these much bigger boats. The actual assembly lines needed to get physically bigger. They were going to need a bigger boat. Somebody told me to make that joke, and well, now I've done it, and we're going to continue right on. And actually, this kind of challenge around growth is something that many of us are familiar with, and you know, even if your company is not growing at 2 times speed, you can still experience, training teams in particular can still experience, areas where they'll need to grow the training that they have to deliver. That could be because maybe the company made an acquisition, maybe there has been a product line reduction and people need to be retrained on what we're going to sell going forward. There's a whole bunch of reasons why growth needs to happen, and it's not necessarily overall company or organizational growth, but in this case it was. Okay, and this is I would say, typical reaction that people have when they're faced with, we got to do at least a minimum of doubling the training, because they had to onboard all these people, but they also had to train them up from scratch, because as a manufacturer, even if you've been a lifelong welder or something, if you come in and were hired by Boston Whaler, you had to be trained from the ground up to do your entire job. So this is the typical reaction, and the reason for this is because you have more training. That means you're going to need more money. You're going to definitely need more heads, and all of this leads to more headaches. That's the conventional wisdom. Our goal today is to kind of maybe show you an alternate path, some would say an alternate reality, where you don't necessarily need to spend more money, go out there and really bump up your head count and have all these additional headaches if you're going to deliver more training. There's another way. This is our thesis here at Administrate. And just for some context, this is kind of the numbers that we're talking about. So, it's a mid-sized manufacturer, small to mid-sized manufacturer. They had a headcount of about 800 people. They wanted to double that, and they were targeting kind of around 1,600. They figured that they needed to overhire and get to kind of 1,800 because there'd be natural attrition for the folks that came on board. They had a very, very small training team. Many of the training teams that we work with are in kind of the, dozens or 50 to 100 folks. This was a small training team. They were already pretty lean and pretty efficient. So they were the team that was responsible for training the existing staff, and they needed to also bring in the new folks. And the training team of the 5, they would all teach courses, but because many of these courses were very technical and involved things, like actually putting stuff together, they had about 10 to 15 instructors that would kind of work part-time out on the factory floor, but would also be part of the instruction team. And they kind of really knew that classroom instruction was really, really critical. That was the best way for them to teach and train up their workforce. But often they were kind of struggling, even at the time before they started to grow, with the delivery of this, because they would just get too busy. It was an administrative nightmare to make sure all the stuff was scheduled in classes. And so they were kind of falling back and relying on their LMS in areas where they actually would prefer not to. And so that was like a core concern as well. And then they did have a lot of hands-on training, and what that meant was, because they were a manufacturer where guys are using their hands and people are going out there and building stuff, the hands-on training usually required very specific resources, and these resources were often very difficult to manage. And in addition to that, in order to kind of suit up and learn how to fiberglass the hull of a boat, for example, you had to have a whole bunch of safety prerequisites and things that must be true before you started that hands-on training. And just as an example of some of the hands-on training that we're talking about, fiberglassing was one. They get donned head to toe with protective garb, and then go in, and it was looked like this garden hose sprayer, and they would spray this mold and so forth. And I don't understand much of any of it, but very hands-on. So you have a limited number of spray booths, you have a limited number of molds, and it's this type of management of, is the spray booth going to be available 2 weeks from next Tuesday? Where do you store that information? A lot of it was being done in spreadsheets. Some of it was being done on whiteboards. Some of it was being done with SharePoint. These are familiar tales from training teams out there. And in addition to all of this, right, so you had, not only did you have the 800 people that already worked at Boston Whaler, but you needed to train up 800 new people, and then the 800 existing people had to be recertified throughout the year. Not everybody had to get recertified on everything every year, but recertification burden was existing and important, and they also had to make sure that they trained the 800 people that were already at the factory on the new boat models that they were going to be building, right? So this wasn't just kind of linear doubling of work for the training team. It actually, and we see this a lot, right? If the organization wants to double, sometimes the training team's workload can 10x or more. And so this was a very, very difficult problem that they were going to need help to solve. And so when they thought about this, how are we going to deal with this challenge? Really, there are kind of 5 key things that helped drive this 2x growth, okay? And I'm going to start from the bottom and work up because, this is a non-traditional stream day for us, but it's actually because the top one was the most important. I want to spend a minute or two talking about that. But basically, what they did is they really wanted to invest in automation because they knew that they're doubling their headcount and spending all this money, it could be done, but they felt like there was a better way. And so they said, they looked at their team, they were already doing tons and tons of manual administrative, kind of very important, but very low value work. It's just not high value sending out reminder emails or making sure that everybody's calendar is updated and so forth. And they looked at their team, they said, we could actually get this done if we could stop doing all this administrative manual work. And so automation became a priority for them. And then what they wanted to do is take the time that they reclaimed from all of this manual administrative low value work, and they wanted to invest that reclaimed time. They also decided that in order to hit their growth objectives, they couldn't rely on e-learning solely, right? And they really wanted to double down on classroom training. And so for them, they knew that the best, fastest way to get people out on the assembly line and productive was to go through classes. And so they made the decision that classroom training they're going to double down on. They're going to still use e-learning where it made sense, but they really wanted to focus on getting the highest quality training to the folks the fastest in a way that they could measure, that they could really make sure that people were learning how to do these intricate assemblies very well and so forth. And they also integrated their learning systems with their manufacturing systems. Now, I've got an asterisk next to that because that's an entirely different story and an entirely different kind of focus, and I want to skip over that today. But that was kind of like phase 2. So we want to focus on really the tangible things that they did that didn't require any outside IT help or assistance or investment. And we'll probably talk about that story later on in a future live stream. But ultimately, all of this, and what I thought was so smart by the CEO of Boston Whaler, who actually bizarrely went to university in Edinburgh, so that was something that was kind of cool. That CEO was very, very smart. He came in, he said, we've got this goal. We're going to have to double the size of the factory. We're going to have to double our team size. We're going to have to double our product line. And in order to do that, the training team is going to be pretty much the first phone call. So they were the first group, along with HR, that was told this news, that started planning for this and so forth. And this is really what we want to see is when an organization is going through big change, the training team needs to be on the forefront of that and really kind of lead the charge. And that was something that they did that I thought was very smart. It's hard to do sometimes in corporate environments, but if you're out there listening and you're running an organization and you're about to go through a big change, highly recommend you get the training team involved early and often. Okay, and so they wanted to get all this manual work automated, and then they wanted to take that time that they were spending on automation or on manual work and reinvest it. And so we call this kind of reclaimed time. What would you do? What could you do if you got 80% or 90% of your time back? Most training teams today, and this is a deep sadness for us, and it's why kind of we exist and why we get out of bed in the morning. Most training teams today spend a huge amount of their time not training, not teaching, not helping with organizational change, but doing manual work. Manual work primarily around scheduling. So even if you only do e-learning, there's going to be a lot of work usually just to get the right students onto the right courses and so forth. And if you're doing classroom training, training. There's so much work that needs to be done to get these students into a class, make the class effective, make sure the teachers arrive, make sure the equipment is there, and so forth. And that's just not, high value, high return work. And so to automate that and get back that time, you then have these avenues that you can really invest. And we see this all the time. The average customer of Administrate, just to toot our own horn here, will usually double the volume, and that's usually worst case. I think it's the worst we've ever seen but minimum double the volume of training that they deliver within the first year after implementing Administrate, because they get so much of their time back. And what they did at Boston Whaler specifically was they improved their instruction. So they actually went and did a whole lot of work on making sure that the materials that they had were updated. They standardized things, so it was a good opportunity to say, okay, we're launching new product lines. Let's incorporate the things that we've learned in how to teach people to do this, and put it into that new training. But then let's take what they had learned and backport that and kind of revise all the existing training materials as well. So that was a really high value thing that they did. They improved the materials, but they also improved how they were teaching. So they actually spent time seeing, all right, who's doing the best job here from an instructional, the actual instructor perspective, and then what can we do to roll those best practices out across the entire team. They also improved a lot of their processes. So with automation, all of a sudden they could sit down and say, okay, what's the ideal process? How do we make sure that if it's automated, it can run the same way every time and get a bunch of standardization? And so they standardize all their processes around, getting students onto a course and so forth. And that was really, really valuable. And then one thing that I thought was super interesting that I don't think I'll ever forget, was they actually found that folks were getting, they were getting hired. And I think one time when I visited, it was on a Monday, and that was like intake day, right? So there's like 20 people in the lobby, and they're all filling out paperwork and stuff. And then they were hired, and then they'd start the training. And the interesting thing about it was they would start training, and they'd go in, and the specific example that was used was the fiberglass kind of piece of the instruction. So if you can imagine, it's Florida, it's hot, it's humid, you're going in, you've got head to toe garb all over, protective goggles, everything, and you take this sprayer, and there's a mold, and you're in this like kind of hot shed and whatever, and you start spraying it. And I think the goal was to get it as even as possible, right? And there's an instructor in there, and it's loud because there's a compressor and all that stuff. And so you're kind of in this hot, cramped, unfamiliar garb all over you. You can't see super well, and it's very loud. And at every point, an instructor is kind of shouting instructions to you because it's very, very loud. And what would happen was the first time that you would do that, you wouldn't do it very well, right? And so they showed us a few examples. They were like, here's a piece of fiberglass from, somebody who's just now learning, and it was bumpy and irregular and stuff. And they're like, this is what we want to see. Well, what was happening was after that experience, the student would just be like, man, I didn't do a good job. And they would quit. And they noticed that there was a huge dropout rate of folks literally saying, I can't do this, or I did a bad job, or, I'm going to get fired anyway because I did a bad job, so I might as well quit. They saw a lot of that happening. And so what they did is they started improving the expectation setting before every class and along each course and so forth. And that really cut down on folks that were dropping out of the program, because now all of a sudden it was like, it's okay to, take 4 or 5 times. It's normal to take 4 or 5 times to learn something. So I thought that was really interesting. They also spent a lot of time training trainers, so they kind of beefed up their part-time instructor crew. Now, it wasn't necessarily like a huge bandwidth improvement that they had in terms of just raw numbers of hours or bodies that people had. They worked a little bit more on the kind of flexibility aspect. So they made sure that they had people available in the morning and the afternoon, for example, to teach, which they didn't have before. And all of this was kind of just through this analysis that they could perform once they got their day-to-day jobs automated. They could start looking into, how do we do these improvements? How do we figure out what's working and what's not? And that's a really important thing that folks need to do. And so the outcomes was growth. It was a fantastic outcome. They doubled their production, they doubled their boat lines. It was really, really cool to see, and like literally visiting there before this growth had happened, and then visiting after, and there's like, wow, there's new buildings and all these new people and new parking lot and so forth. So it was really, really cool. And through that process, I think I mentioned a little while ago that they kind of expected to go, they needed to get to 1,600 bodies, but they expected to need to hire about 1,700 to 1,800. Well, what they found was that they had a 60% reduction in employee churn. So not only were the dropouts not happening anymore when new hires came on board, but actually existing employees were staying with the company. And that they attributed that entirely to the improvements they made in the training programs, which was really cool to see. So not only did they not have to do that over hiring, but they hung on to folks that they really wanted to hang on to, because they could identify if somebody was struggling and train them and so forth. So the other thing that was really cool to see, that we love to see and we expect to see with customers, is career advancement. So not only the director of training get a promotion and a raise, but the CEO of Boston Whaler got a promotion and a raise, and actually became a CEO of a much bigger group of boat manufacturers that's owned by Brunswick today. So that was really cool. And ultimately that team had this foundation. So they went through the grinder. It wasn't easy, but they went through the grinder. It was about a 12 to 18 month time frame. And after they came out of that, they knew not only could they be up for any challenge, but that they had a foundation of automation, process improvement, and good tech backing them up to take them on into the future. So it was a really, really cool story. And if you want to read more about it, we've got a QR code. Up there. That's a screenshot of the case study. We'd invite you to go to the website and download that. And I'm going to see if we've got any questions or comments from folks. We encourage you to comment. If you don't want to download the case study, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to buy you a virtual coffee, or, I'm on the road quite a bit throughout Europe and the US, and would love to hang out with you if we're ever in the same city or same event. But I did promise you that I would provide you a travel tip today, because this is a special LinkedIn Live from the road. And so my travel tip today is actually one of the newest travel tips in my quiver. I travel something like, 150,000 miles a year, something along those lines. And this is one of the newest things that I have now in my quiver of tricks to make traveling just a little bit easier. And it's this right behind me. Let's see if I can show you all. I'm going to go back to the part of you. This is a travel electric guitar. Okay. Now it looks a little bit weird. And the reason is because these metal things, probably won't even be able to do this now we're live, they come off, right? Which means that I only have to carry kind of like this tennis racket sized bag. And this thing, because it's electric, and it's got a 9-volt battery in the back here, and then I can plug in my headphones or an amp. I can play this at home too, and I can be off and rocking, even if we're in an airport waiting room. I don't normally play it around people, but it's quiet in a hotel room. Nobody's going to hear it, and you can go nuts. So that's my travel tip. Find a portable electric quiet version of your instrument, and then you can keep practicing on the road. Okay, let's see here. Still can scan that QR code if you like to download that resource, but next week on Tuesday we'll be back at our intergalactic headquarters. The basketball season is over. It will be back in Edinburgh, and I'm going to be joined with one of our solution engineers, a guy named Kevin, who is instrumental in making sure our customers get up and running and successful quickly. And He and I are going to talk about how we integrate Administrate with an LMS or multiple LMSs in just a few days. And we're actually going to show you one of these integrations working, and it'll be a great nerdy chat, maybe a little bit more hands-on and down and dirty than we've been doing in the past. But if you'd like to join us, we're doing this usually on Tuesdays most weeks, and would love to see you there. Just follow us on LinkedIn, connect with me, connect with some of our team. We'd love to answer any questions you have, and I think that is pretty much that. Live from the road out here in Phoenix, celebrating college basketball and the unlikeliest run in college basketball history with the NC State Wolfpack. My name's John. Definitely check in with us, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one.